Today's World Insight with Chang'e. Mission complete for China's Chang'e 4 probe on the moon's dark side. What's the significance? Our panel sheds light.
是我国由航天大国向航天强国迈进的重要标志之一。
And a bridge between East and West. Celebrity investor Jim Rogers tells us about cultural understanding in a time of turbulence.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tianwei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN in Beijing. We begin with China's Chang'e 4 mission on the far side of the moon after the first ever soft landing there earlier this month. The lunar probe and the rover have now taken pictures of each other and sent the photos back to Earth. This lunar mission marks a milestone for the nation's space industry. Chinese authorities have sent a congratulatory letter to the Aerospace Control Center for the Chang'e 4 spacecraft mission. Before we get down to the discussion about its significance and what's next, let's take a look at this.
Landing on the dark side of the moon. China's Chang'e 4 lunar probe softly touched down on the South Pole's Aitken Basin on the far side of the moon for the first time. Launched by a Long March 3B carrier rocket. It sent back the first ever image of the lunar surface on the dark side, along with a picture of the lunar rover U-22, while rolling away from the probe. The U-22 rover also took pictures of the probe, and it has left the first tracks on the dusty surface. After taking a nap, so to speak, the rover has restarted its work.
The Chang'e 4 lander and the U-22 rover are working normally. The Chang'e 4 and U-22 rover have taken pictures of each other, and with the support of the Tueqiao relay satellite, the command center on Earth has received clear and intact images. Chinese and foreign scientific payloads are working normally, carrying out their scientific experiment projects smoothly, and detection data is being transmitted effectively. All this has met the stated objectives of the project. I declare the Chang'e 4 mission a complete success.
China's lunar exploration project began shortly after the world entered a new millennium. A lot was expected of China's lunar exploration project when it launched in 2004. The project was named after a widely known Chinese mythical figure, Chang'e, the Chinese goddess of the moon. The Chang'e 1 blasted off in 2007, circling the moon, and was guided to land on it after the mission. The Chang'e 2 was launched in 2010. It sent back 3D images of the moon. Many say the most remarkable mission was in 2013, when the Chang'e 3 soft landed on the moon. And in 2019, the Chang'e 4 carried out a mission to explore the far side of the moon and beam back a glimpse to Earth.
This success is an important step for us to grow from a big nation in aerospace to a strong nation in aerospace. It also symbolizes that the Chinese people are climbing the world's scientific and technological peak, and the Chinese nation is making more contributions for humanity to explore the mysteries of the universe.
China's lunar exploration will continue with Chang'e 5, which is expected to bring lunar soil back to Earth.
So what indeed is the impact of the Chinese probe landing on the far side of the moon? Let's ask our panel in The Hague, Giuseppe Ribaldi, who is the president of the Moon Village Association, who's also director of the Human Spaceflight of the International Academy of Astronautics. And also in Houston, we have Leroy Chow, who is a former NASA astronaut and International Space Station commander. With us in Beijing, Yang Yuguang, a professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Welcome, gentlemen, to our program. First of all, of course, Mr. Yang, go to you. It's been quite a week already being celebrated here about the landing and about the photo taken. What about that? What is likely to be this step significance for further China's space exploration, particularly on the moon?
Well, the announcement today not only means a success to China, but also a success to the whole world, which means that this is a milestone for the human being of the start of the beginning of the exploration of the far side of the moon. Although for China, of course, in the future, we will have a sample return mission because we have never done that before, although many other countries like US and the former Soviet Union have done that before. But we should have a sample return mission to study the soil of the moon. But this Chang'e 4 mission is really meaningful because the human being has never been there before.
The human being has never been there before, Mr. Chao, and following that, China is building an orbiting space station, likely, and then eventually the moonwalk. Do you think, from your perspective, is China taking the right path for future exploration of the outer space by, namely, make sure to do as much as possible on the moon?
Absolutely. I think China is taking a very measured and deliberate long-range plan, which is good. Ever since Yang Liwei first flew in 2003, each successive human mission has done more and more with Tiangong 1, Tiangong 2, and it makes sense to send unmanned probes like Chang'e 1 through 4 out to explore the region before sending people. And so Chang'e 4 is significant in that it's never been done before. No one has ever put a probe on the far side of the moon before. Also, almost equally as impressive technically is the fact that China was able to launch a relay communication satellite into a halo orbit at the second Lagrange point, and that shows a very high level of sophistication. And of course, we know that China will soon begin construction of their space station. And also they have plans, although not well defined yet, of one day sending astronauts to the moon. So I think this shows a very well thought out, deliberate plan and, you know, and a commitment to that plan.
Right. Mr. Ribaldi, I mean, it's already been done, that human being on the moon. That was back in the 1970s by the Americans. And China now is having its own plan of doing it again, probably in a very different way. But many would wonder, what's there on the moon that would be so attractive to researchers one generation after another? Can the Chinese really get much new out of this research so far than, let's just say, what's already been achieved by the Americans?
So, ni hao.
Ni hao.
I believe the exploration of the moon, which is to see you as well. So the exploration of the moon, the Chinese are restarting, so to speak, again, it's extremely important because this time we are not going to go back. You just mentioned about 50 years ago we landed on the moon, and 60 years ago the first probe, Lunar 1, went to the moon. So people might think that there is no need to go back, but in reality this time we go back for economic reasons. We have been going to the moon for political reasons in the 60s. We're now going back, and China is, of course, leading that exploration, but together, as we will discuss later, with other countries in the world. So the main reason is economics, and so China has laid down a well-thought plan of step-by-step exploration, which will then allow them to maximize the investment using resources available on the moon.
Since we talk about history, let's take a look at some of the history. The Soviets had the first ever mission to the moon when Lunar 1 completed the first lunar flyby in January 1959. They quickly followed this in September of that year with the first impact on the moon with Lunar 2. The Americans made a breakthrough with Apollo 8, which was the first manned mission to the moon, and Apollo 11, the first manned moon landing. China made history 2007 with Chang'e 1, the first ever Chinese explorer in lunar orbit, and with Chang'e 3, the first Chinese lander on the moon. So fast forward, 2018, Chang'e 4 had the first rover on the far side of the moon. So you can see step by step the human beings are doing different things on the moon. Having said that, though, it is very important for us to understand, Mr. Chao, how is the moon exploration necessarily going to help the human beings be able to see much more than we have already had about the outer space? What are some of the most important things that we need to discover from the moon? Do we know some concrete plans with which we could really achieve these goals?
Right. Well, the fundamental point about research is you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, and that's why you're doing the research work.
But
now,
you could argue,
things.
Mr. Chow, instead of going to the moon, you can go to the Mars, you can go to the other possibilities, but not necessarily to the moon.
Right.
So here's the thing: why the moon? Is the moon going to guarantee us something at least?
Well, it's hard to say in concrete terms what could come out of the lunar research, but there's some very important scientific objectives that can only be done on the moon, or only can be done conveniently right now on the moon. One would be the radio astronomy experiments that the Chang'e 4 will carry out, because the moon, being on the far side of the moon, it allows these observations to be made because the radio signals coming from the Earth are effectively blocked by the moon. Now, there are other things we can study, some basic fundamental research also being done by Chang'e 4 using ground-penetrating radar to study the structure, the internal structure of the moon, and that could give us some clues about the formation of our solar system and even of our universe. As far as why the moon and not Mars, well, it's not Mars. It's the moon is the next step before you go to Mars. And the reason I think you use the moon and you explore the moon, particularly with humans, is that you want to make sure all the things that you're going to send to Mars are going to work. You know, the moon is only 3 days away. Mars is about 6 months away when the planets are aligned. And you want to make sure that you prove out all the gear, the habitats, rovers, spacesuits. Maybe you train your astronauts on the moon first before you send a crew to Mars. So there are a lot of operational and scientific reasons why the moon is an important place to go back to explore and to develop operations and test hardware. So a number of different reasons before we reach out for, say, Mars.
Well, anything, when you see that in the world, there is a sense of competition. But one thing is very important, it's not so-called a bad competition, but rather good competition that make everybody work hard, but not necessarily divert them apart. Exploration of the moon, particularly important in this sense. Mr. Riboldi, how much have we seen in human history that countries are working together, or rather working in pure sense of competition only when it comes to the exploration of the moon? And will this, for example, the Chinese exploration, be different? Are we going to see a different trend, Mr. Riboldi?
Well, I believe and I hope yes, because I think going to the moon, there is a number of programs, national programs, of going to the moon, but differently from program like the International Space Station, where we have, so to speak, a Western bloc together with Russia, and then we are going to have the Chinese space station. On the moon, the location is, of course, vast, but we have to cooperate in a very open way. And by the way, this is the concept of the Moon Village. The Moon Village is basically each stakeholder has his own program, but they are cooperating in an open way, in the way they wish to do. And I believe working and cooperating in space is very important for peace on Earth. We have seen how important ISS it has been to keep a relationship between the Soviet Union, Russia, and the American, even in a high tension. So my hope and belief, and as I said, Moon Village vision is exactly that, and the mission Chang'e 4 certainly could be part of that vision, is basically cooperation, each one with his own program, but open to discuss and go together in the name of humankind.
Mr. Yang, it is already reported this time about the Chang'e this time, that there has been some crucial exchange of information and data, even between the Chinese and the Americans, even under the current circumstances. How should we understand this?
Well, this is very amazing. You know that we already have a very long-term cooperation with the European side and with Russia. We have ground support, the telemetry support from European countries and other countries. And we have our station in Argentina. And we have some cooperation on the radioisotope heating device with Russia. But you know that because the limitations raised from the U.S. Congress, we do not have any concrete cooperation steps with the U.S. side. But this time I heard from the announcement from the China National Space Administration that the U.S. has provided the accurate orbit parameters of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is the most important assessment of the U.S. in the lunar orbit. And also we provided the landing site, the accurate coordinate of the landing site, and also the landing time of the Chang'e 4. So this is, I think, is a very good sign for the future potential cooperation between China and the U.S.
Mr. Chow, you feel the same way?
Absolutely. You know, it might not be known to many people, but there's actually some Chinese scientific work being done aboard the International Space Station through a commercial company that launched a payload. And so there's more and more cooperation, I hope, will be coming in the future. I've been personally advocating for that cooperation. I've seen the fruits of that collaboration, as Mr. Ribaldi mentioned, about the ISS and our partners, including Russia. And so my hope is that by exploring space together and doing more cooperation, that our countries can get along better in other areas as well.
If you look at the budget, China is investing, according to the book, about $8 billion US, according to some media reports, into the space development program. The U.S., both military and civilian combined, according to media reports, that is about $48 billion US. Of course, China is bigger than Russia and Japan combined, but much smaller than that of the United States. But think about that. This 8 plus 48 of the U.S. put together, that is more than $50 billion US. If they can be cooperating, there seems to be much bigger possibility that miracle could happen and new things could happen. Mr. Yang, what do you make of that possibility?
Well, what you mentioned is really reasonable. You know that the international cooperation is very important, not only because that will benefit the whole world, but also because you know that this kind of manned space program or deep space program need a lot of money. It is very difficult for the decision makers to choose this program or that program.
That's right.
The cooperation between different countries can reduce the threshold for the decision makers and make it easier for them to choose these kind of deep space missions, and both countries can benefit from that. Of course, every country have its scientific goal and engineering goal, but each country can develop the technology needed for its own development, but there is no conflict between these corporations.
Mr. Ribaldi, I know you are someone who has been working, you know, on all possibilities of cooperation. That's why you are holding so dear to the idea of so-called moon village. But you have to look at the geopolitics these days and also the apparent will by some to further put ideology in almost everything that we have to face these days in the world, as if we were in the Cold War era. So, Mr. Ribaldi, how pragmatic and possible is this possibility for cooperation, China, U.S. particularly?
I think this cooperation, it is a must. In fact, there is what has been discussed. There are already in place a number of agreements. But yes, I think the future, it is definitely a must because all the missions are going to the moon. And so we see already discussion going on about frequency. I believe there is a cooperation between countries in order to avoid the frequency. So being the location, the moon, it will be inevitable. The political issue, as you rightfully are saying, of course, pose a problem from the point of view of the principle. But when the mission, as we are starting, let's not forget that this is the first mission of this year. We're going to have several missions later on. We might talk later. So my point I want to make is very important. The cooperation, it will happen, and not necessarily at the political level, but it will happen at technical level in order to solve all the issues that they are presenting themselves. So I think, and the issue of working together will basically be a reality, and not for one specific country. So I believe just one point I want to mention, what is very important that the country understand that the public need to be involved. So I think China has been leading with Chang'e 4. What is important is a major information campaign, because a lot of people are eager to know what's going on with Chang'e 4, and I think a much leadership of China on the global scale in the area also communication will be really extremely valuable for everybody.
I see. Mr. Chow, I want to turn to you and ask you also a crucial question, which is about commercialization. The space program's commercialization, crucial as they say for the future of the development of this program. Once we put it into the market, there seems to be much more momentum, much more resources coming in. But whether we can be successful or not, there seems to be already some tests, but not necessarily a lot of success. So, Mr. Chow, how do you see the involvement of the market? Will commercialization be really one force pushing things forward, or it's only become, you know, some of those so-called decorations?
Well, commercial companies, of course, have been producing spacecraft for many decades. All of American spacecraft are built by commercial companies. However, the difference now in the last several years is that we've had a few commercial companies with very visionary leaders who have either the financial resources themselves or access to it to actually carry out their visions in space. For example, Blue Origin is their plan, long-range plan, is to actually build infrastructure in low Earth orbit and around the moon in cislunar space. And the idea is to promote business in this region. And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and the founder of Blue Origin, is funding this personally. The other big company in the news is Spacex. Of course, founder Elon Musk has access to financial resources to carry out in a stepwise manner his vision of reaching Mars. And so that's the difference in the commercial sectors now, is that you have these leaders who want to make profits but also want to do exploration and build infrastructure. That's something we've never had before. You point out that there are a lot of commercial companies right now trying to do space, and that's true. Most of them, the vast majority, will fail. But there will be a few standouts that come out and actually do something worthwhile. So I think that's just the nature of commercial, businesses in a new area like space and space flight and space hardware. And so we'll just have to see how that all hashes out. But there will be an influence, and there already is a huge influence by some of these commercial companies.
Mr. Yang, how is China, particularly those that are working in the system, looking at the vibrant changes going on, particularly about commercialization of space programs and space exploration elsewhere in the world?
Well, actually speaking, the commercial space sector is also booming last year in China. We are very happy to see that the private companies have already accomplished their first attempt for the orbital launch. Well, that's very meaningful. Although it failed for the its last stage, but that's really a good milestone for the future development of China's private sectors. Because you know that China is still a developing country, so we focus mainly on the space activities which can have direct returns for the national economy. But for the space explorations, like the manned space activities and the deep space missions, it is also possible for the attendance of these kind of private companies, because you know that the government always in lead of these kind of projects, but they can also have the similar manner like the United States to have these private companies to be engaged in these programs.
Mr. Ribaldi, more players on the ground. What would that mean for Moon Village and what you have been working so hard for?
Well, I think you said indeed the more stakeholders. Let's be as usual on the practical side. 2019 we'll see at least 3 moon landing. The first one very successful, the Chinese. The second planned moon landing is a commercial mission from Space IL in Israel. And the third one is coming from the Indian with Chang'e 2, Chandrayaan 2. So already in this year you already see 3 stakeholders, of which one is a commercial partner. So there is a clear indication, and there is a number of plans and mix between government and private industry, which was not the case in the 60s. And this is going to be the reason why industry is going to move forward because they start to see in their business plan commercial. It has been mentioned Elon Musk. Elon Musk, let's not forget, has planned in 2024 to go around the moon in a commercial way with the BFS. And we have seen from the track record that Elon Musk is delivering, not on the year which is indicating, but at least 2 or 3 years later is delivering. If that is the case, this will be a dramatic change in approach to the moon. 100 tons on the surface of the moon. And this will open a full market for non-space company in order to try to really use their technology for different markets which will open to the moon. Wow. The exploration on the moon will be like telecommunication satellite at the beginning.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. We're looking forward to those days. More to be delivered in a way. Thank you so much for the 3 of you for being with us and helping us to understand the significance and accompanying us throughout this very exciting week about the exploration for the far side of the moon. Giuseppe Ribodi, Leroy Chow, and Yang Yuguang. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you. And stay with us here on World Insight with me, Tianwei. Still to come on our program. A bridge between East and West. Celebrity investor Jim Rogers tells us about cultural understanding in a time of turbulence with him and his family right after this break. You're watching World Insight with me, Tianwei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. The world has changed rapidly, and many find themselves in a confusion due to a failure to understand one another in international relations and also in real life. Some people, though, like the investor, well-known Jim Rogers, seem to know how to roll with the times. Mr. Rogers has long been curious about cultural differences. Back in 1988, a young American man spent 36 days on his motorcycle traveling from Shanghai to Pakistan. He had his long ride filmed, and the journey gave him a first-hand experience with China that was then very remote to the Western world, especially to the United States. Later on, his 2 daughters settled down with the family in Singapore, and both of them learned speaking Mandarin extremely well. Recently, I had the pleasure of hosting Ms. Rogers and his elder daughter, Happy Rogers, who is quite a celebrity in the Chinese social media. Our conversation went from relations between China and the United States to cultural exchanges, and it all started from a poem of the Tang Dynasty.
解落三秋叶，能开2月花。过江千尺浪，入竹万竿斜. That was actually from the Song Dynasty. It's called.
Jim, I think we should have.
I know, I agree. I don't speak Chinese.
Great job.
I think it perfectly captures nature's beauty, and it's very four very short lines.
Oh my God, do you feel pressure?
No,
Don't you feel pressure?
I know that I'm hopeless. I know that I'm
Daddy,
hopeless.
you're not
But one of the things I've learned a lot of Chinese culture from them. But all these Tang Dynasty poems and so on, they're so short and to the point, and they say a lot. It's amazing. There's so many of them. I didn't know that before.
Concise and precise.
Yes.
Exactly, through the poetry of China. But, you know, one of the things people are so fascinated about your family is, I mean, you are well known for being a wild guy. I mean, you ride motorcycles throughout the world, and certainly a very successful investor. But, you know, your life has reached a stage that you care so much about your family, and your family are absolutely fascinated by the Chinese culture. How is it?
Well, I realized when I came to China in the 80s that China would be the next great country in the world. And I used to tell people, teach your children Mandarin. And then I had one. So what do I do now? So, but as you can see, we moved to Asia because of China. Both of my daughters speak fluent Mandarin. The little one is just now in a Chinese movie.
Oh my
As a
God.
matter of fact, what's the name of it?
天火. It's coming out very soon, and it's fabulous.
See, the sister is already doing some publicity.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, no, but she's 10 years old, and they called us. We didn't call them. The producer called up and said, "We want your little girl to be in the movie."
You speak Mandarin.
Because they saw her speaking Mandarin on the internet or something. So no, we're everywhere. We love China. We come here a lot.
你好. Hi everyone. I'm Happy Rogers, and I'm back. Today, my little sister, V. Rogers, is going to be my guest star. She is going to be performing in Mandarin. 大家好，我的名字是快乐罗杰斯。今天，我的妹妹小蜜蜂要给大家表演。我的名字是小蜜蜂，我7岁。今天我要给你们表演门头有个人。门头有个人。手里拿个盆，砰一声响，是盆碰了门，还是门碰了盆
If that was too fast for you.
门后有个人，手里拿个盆，砰一声响，是盆碰了门，还是门碰了盆
That was a Chinese tongue twister that Bee learned at school.
Thank you. Bye. 再见。
1984, you came to China. Long time. Think about it, already 35 years.
Yeah, no, I was terrified when I came because American propaganda all my life had said the Chinese are evil, vicious, dangerous, bloodthirsty people. I got off the plane, I figured I was going to be murdered, you know. But then I quickly found out that the Chinese are cultured, educated, ambitious, hardworking. And then I realized, well, China's the next great country in the world. I better learn a lot more about China. And here she is.
When was the time you figure out this country is on the rise?
1988, I drove my motorcycle from Shanghai to Pakistan, all across China, and I was stunned every day. There were all these people working from dawn to dusk, in the fields, everywhere. Nobody stopped. They saved a lot of money. It was just astonishing to see everybody working all the time and being very ambitious and attentive.
Dad told you about those days?
Yeah,
Happy?
absolutely. He loves talking about his trips across China.
Well, they made a movie. I made a documentary of it, and I make her watch it.
All the time.
I make her watch the documentary.
Riding my bike across China is something I've wanted to do for as long as I can remember. I'm only going to live once. When I die, I don't want to have people say about me, well, Jim Rogers was a great Wall Street investor, and that's it. I want to get out there and see what's going on in the world. I got no wife, I got no children, no responsibilities. Why not? I think I really would have liked to have been a Pony Express rider. I'm doing this trip just for me. I don't care about being on television. I don't even have a television. It's my trip. 8,000 kilometers in 36 days from Shanghai to Pakistan. It's going to be the perfect adventure.
Things have changed so much. Certainly China has been on the rise for quite some time. And yet we see the relations, though, between China and the United States is in a stage of great change. Jim, I just wondered, as someone who came to this country who can read the Chinese minds, I have to say, what actually is going on here in this country? And how do you see this change?
It is madness what's happening in Washington. China and America should be friends and be great prosperity together, do great triumphs together. And for some reason, America has it in its, or some people, not everybody, some people in Washington have it in their heads that they need to bash China. I just don't understand it, because together, I mean, everywhere I've ever been in China, the Chinese love Americans. And America, they don't like Washington necessarily. I don't like Washington necessarily. But it's just amazing, because together we could just do fabulous things together, and Washington keeps messing it up.
What can we hold on to in order to get over that stage, or the current stage?
I hope I survive it. We just keep your head down, don't get deep in debt, and don't get overextended.
That's what you're doing in your business, right?
That's what I'm doing in my business, in my private life, in my children's lives, everybody's lives. I'm trying not to get too extended.
Happy. Some say it is exactly your generation that the Americans do not necessarily see that their lives are necessarily better than their parents. Of course, you are in Asia. You see a very different picture. This is pretty much a continent still on the rise, in Singapore as well. How do you see those comments? Have you visited some parts of America? What have you noticed about that country? I mean, it's a country where you were born, but not necessarily where you are being raised up.
As often as I can, I visit my grandparents in North Carolina, and they live, and my mother was born there too. It's a very, very small town, only 50,000 or so people. And so I see that, I mean, you see New York City, which is huge and bustling and amazing, but then there are also smaller towns and smaller little tiny places that really are what America is about, because America isn't all, you know, like New York or Los Angeles.
Just like China isn't all about Beijing and Shanghai.
Yeah, exactly. You go to New York City, you haven't seen America. You go to Moscow, you haven't seen Russia. Do you think that your life was better, Daddy?
My life was better than my parents' lives, yes. There's no question about that.
Do you think my life was better than your life?
Well, you're only 15.
Yeah.
So far your life, when you're 15, is better when I was 15, that's for sure.
Ask us in a little bit.
And I just wonder about you. You know, you're already coming from a globalized generation. So what does that mean to you when you travel around Chinese universities, see and talk to your peers?
When we go to any new place or any new country that's different from, I grew up in Singapore or even America, it's like this perfect little melting pot of all the different cultures of the world, where I get to experience the different sides of the world and 开阔视野. You know, yeah, exactly. I am very blessed to be able to do that. And going to the Chinese universities, it's lovely because you see a different side. Even though Singapore education there are lots of tests and everything else, but it's nothing compared to here in China.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And Chinese universities, I would love to come to one of them when I'm 15, so I have a few years to think about it, thank goodness. But when I do have to decide, I'm definitely thinking about it, if only just because my Chinese will improve so much if I do come here.
You can see she is pretty much comfortable everywhere she goes.
Yeah, as I say, when she's 15, I had never been anywhere. I probably couldn't find China on a map when I was 15. She's been to all these places, and she speaks these languages, and has traveled everywhere. But no, it's an entirely different generation.
Many say, Happy, your generation is really a globalized generation. Wherever you go, you could feel comfortable, and you talk to your peers. They're coming from different cultures. But many wonder, Jim, I'm going to come back to you about that question too. Many wonder whether this will be the trend, because we see a lot of debates going on in the world about multilateralism or not, globalization or not. Happy when you see those debates, whether it's on TV or over the dinner table between your father and their friends. From your generation, from your own perspective, what is it?
Globalization, modernization, everyone has a phone, 低头族, you know, that's what they say in Chinese, where everyone is always looking down. I mean, there are, of course, pros and cons to that, but globalization is just everywhere. But we also have to think about the fact that, well, I'm blessed, you're blessed, we're all blessed to be able to experience the benefits and the merits of globalization. There are some people who haven't been able to yet.
The risk, of course, is that throughout history, when things go bad, politicians blame foreigners. Doesn't matter which country, everywhere throughout history. Foreigners have different skin color, different language, different religion. They smell bad. Their food smells bad. I cannot tell you, wait, no, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, and their food smells bad. I mean, it's astonishing. Politicians will stir up trouble.
Not just politicians. Everyone.
I understand, but politicians know how to feed it and make it worse, because when things are wrong, it's easy to blame somebody else. And it's going to be, when things get bad, you should be, I'm worried. You should be worried. I'm worried.
I think a lot in the world are worried.
I hope so. Maybe we can solve the problem if enough of us get worried.
You know, Jim, it's about two things. One is, how shall we understand the legacy that we have been creating together? I mean, many have been creating together. Secondly is, from now on, where are we moving to? And how can we get there?
Look out the window. The 21st century is going to be the century of China. This is not the direct question you asked. You said, where are we moving? We're moving to Asia, I assure you. And again, many Western countries are in decline. It's sad. I don't like saying it. I'm, Western Caucasian. I don't like it at all. But I have to face facts. So make sure everybody learns Mandarin.
And you are too.
I mean, I'm hopeless.
What is the latest phrase you pick up?
I'm not smart enough to learn Mandarin. I'm not smart.
Which phrase should Dad learn?
Tell them the second thing you learned in China, not the first, the second thing, second phrase.
The being Pichu, because I was having so many problems. I learned cold beer, give me a beer. And it was hard to find. It was hard to find a cold beer in those days.
In those days, 35 years ago, yes, indeed. But today you could pretty much live comfortably anywhere in this country. But it's such a wonderful thing to have both of you, Happy and Jim, sitting here with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Happy. Yes. Jim Rogers and his daughter, Happy Rogers, talking about the East and the West. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. And have a great weekend, everyone.